Hey, this is Samantha Newark, and you're listening to the truly outrageous podcasters of the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to our studio. This is Studio 2009. I'm, of course, TFG and Mike. Joining me, as always, Steve Megatron. Hello.
Hello.
And this is episode 15. Every episode of the fives here at Studio 2009, we do a podcast approach with a special guest. And this time around, we get Amy, a.k.a. LadyWreck. Hello.
Woohoo! Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm here. I'm good. And let's do all the good podcasting things.
Absolutely. For those of you who may not know who LadyWreck is, she is the former queen of the underbase over at Moonbase 2, and she has done numerous Transformers comics episodes with me over on the Pullbag here at the GCRN. And to get started, we have 27 questions. Getting started as podcasters. When did you discover podcasts, and what was the first one you listened to?
Okay. Ooh, this is really going old school for me. So I was probably, let's see, I usually remember it in terms of Transformers, what I was watching at the time.
Of course.
Because that's what started it all. It was May. It was the May that they had just wrapped up Transformers Animated, like the last episode had come out. And I was like, I don't remember if I watched it, but there was a lot of talk about it on a podcast that I found for the first time. And
it was probably 2009, I think.
Yeah, it was something 2009, I want to say it was maybe 2008, 2009, something like that. I don't remember. I could go look it up, but then you would hear me clicking and clacking, and there'd be more editing involved. And at the time, I had my first cell phone. I know this sounds really bad because it's like this is 2000s. I'd been married for a couple of years. I had a kid. I had two kids, and they were both little, and I wanted to get another technology thing, and I wanted to get the iPod Nano, something like that, so I could listen to audiobooks and put audiobooks on that and listen to that while I was doing stuff with the kids and doing stuff around. And so my husband got me an iPod, and I can't remember what happened. One thing led to another, and I looked into something called podcasts, and I thought, there's got to be there's some Transformer podcasts out there. So the first one that I listened to was TF Wire, and it was about
those guys.
I do too.
Yeah. So this was about when they were winding down, when they just kind of they really hated Transformers, which is funny. It's like they had a lot of rage, and I just happened to jump on the bandwagon at that point and going, wow, these guys, they were hilarious, but they were very against Transformers.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, maybe I should go find another podcast that maybe is a little more positive. And that's when I found Moonbase 2. And the rest, as they say, is history.
How long after you started listening did you want to start your own show or be a part of a podcast?
Okay, so I started listening to Moonbase 2, and I got on their forum. They had just started a new. I can't remember if they started a new forum or whatnot. No, they hadn't started the new one yet. So I started lurking and started interacting a little bit with people online for the Moonbase 2 forum that they had, and then they had an auto assembly, and everybody, of course, had an amazing time. And the podcast content that came out from that was just it made me want to be there, even though I was on the other side of the planet. About 6 months after that, it was this happened in August. So it was okay, so Animated ended in May.
Yep.
Found TF Wire, listened to it for a couple of months. Found Moonbase 2, listened to it about a couple of months. But by August, they had their auto assembly. So fast forward to the next January, there was a call put out on the forums that they were looking for reviewers to review the comics. And I and one of me, myself and somebody else who ended up being my podcasting host partner, his name was Matt King Grimmy. Both of us answered the call. And so we're like, okay, sure. I could read a story and write a review on it. That's easy. And I did. I wrote my first review. They sent me a comic. I wrote my first review. I did not know this at the time, but Matt was also doing the same exact thing. And then after I turned that in, I think Dave Wallace, who was running Moonbase 2 at the time, he contacted me and said, hey, now you have to be on the podcast with us. And I was like, what? Really? It's like, there's no way I'm going to do that. But then I thought, okay, I'll just try it out. It's going to be only a one-shot thing, so whatever. And so I got on it. I was super nervous, but I had a blast. And then after that, Dave messaged me and said, okay, now we have to have you on all the time. And I was like, no way. And it just kind of took off from there. I was kind of like, I didn't approach it as I wanted to do that. It was more like, Dave said, now you're going to have to be a part of the podcast. And I was like, okay. I don't know how to do that. He's like, just come on and talk to us. I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then of course, Dave was notorious. I love him, but he is notorious for not doing any editing. He'll just put it out raw. At the time, that's how he was. And there were so many things that got put into those rough early podcasts of me that just, I face palmed every single time I heard it, that I started taking my hand at doing a little bit of editing and sending it to him and saying, hey, I'll edit this time. He was like, oh, okay, sure. And so one thing led to another. And eventually I took over all the editing duties. And then after a few months of doing that, I think the June after this, I think my first one was in February. And then we did a couple of weeks where we podcasted. And I think by June, he said, okay, now you guys have to have your own podcast. You and Matt are in charge of doing comic reviews from now on. Here, go. And I was like, okay. So I literally was just a fish out of water, just, trying to figure out how to make it work, editing and having fun doing it, and it got really addictive really quick.
So what was your plan in getting the Underbase off the ground?
What was my plan?
Yeah.
As in my model for making it successful?
Sure.
Just follow what Dave said. I mean, that does sound like, I didn't have a plan. I kind of didn't have a plan. I had no idea what I was doing. But, we kind of took the Moonbase 2 and how they were doing things and kind of tried to wrap that into something. And of course, I think our vision started becoming more of a thing when Matt and I were able to take over the podcast. We just made it our own. We did things our way. We had like an intro where we would kind of just talk a little bit, then we would bring up the news, and then we would go straight into a review, and we'd always have a guest on so that we would have 3 people that we could talk to. And I was always the positive one, and Matt was always the negative one. So we balanced each other out really well.
Very cool, very cool. Which do you prefer, audio or video podcasting, as both a fan and a producer?
I'm going to go for the audio just because video adds a whole new layer. And I think that as a person that listens to audiobooks and other podcasts now, I tend to gravitate more toward the audio because I'm usually doing other things while I'm listening. And so I have done little podcast segments for the Radio Free Cybertron crew. Back in the day, I did that. And I had to do video with that. And so it just adds another layer, and I have to use something else. And I'm like, okay, I did kind of get a little crazy with some of the video options that I had. But for the most part, it was kind of fun, but it's just a whole new layer. And so I tend to go for audio.
Mm-hmm. Take it away, Steve, with the next set of questions.
So what kind of setup did you have when you started podcasting, and what do you use now?
Okay, so this is really... Okay, so the first computer that I started podcasting on was about to die. And it was a Mac. I don't remember what it was called. It was just a small Mac, and I still have it. It still boots up and everything, but it's like the fan is constantly running, so it makes this really, really yucky noise in the background, and it sounds kind of crappy. Then I got a new computer. When I got the new computer, everything improved, obviously. I started out with just having a headset. Actually, I take that back. It was just the Apple iPod, the wired ones that came with my headset that for my Apple iPod Nano that I used. It had like a microphone on it. And so I used that for like the first, 6-7 months before I actually got a headset that was a little nicer. I got one that had a boom mic on it, and it popped a lot because I didn't know what I was doing until I figured, I have to get a little thing on there to keep it from popping. And so I got that. And then it was just kind of an evolution of trying to find the right mic and making it work. And now I use just a really nice earphone stereo headset with a blue Snowball omnidirectional mic. Let's see, with the editing, I used GarageBand. Let's see, what else did I use? And I think that was pretty much it, just GarageBand. And I would just throw things into that and start editing. I didn't use Audacity a lot, although I knew it was free. When you have a Mac, it comes with GarageBand already. So it was like, hey, I'll just use this. And I learned how to use that before I learned how to use Audacity. So I stuck with what I knew. And then I think that was pretty much it. Like even for the video editing that I did, I just used iMovie, I think. Whatever was on the Mac. I didn't know how to use it. I just have to watch a couple YouTube videos and play around with it and see what I could do until I finally figured that out. And there you go. I didn't take any classes or anything. I just had to figure it out.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. So if your headphones or your mic breaks down, do you buy the exact same thing, or do you try and upgrade to something different?
Right now, I haven't ever had anything actually break on me yet. So
lucky.
I know. I've been really lucky.
Yeah, I've had headphones go on me, but not my microphone.
Well, the headphones that I had, like I said, I had headphones at first. Eventually, they did the ones that I was using, the iPod, whatever ones that I was using, they had the microphone. Eventually, those did give out, but I had a backup at the time, so I just went and used that until I figured it out. And trying to find what you want in the terms of headset and boom mic and all of this, there's so many choices that it's overwhelming. The fact that I had a Macintosh computer kind of limited what I was going to use because of the operating system and everything that I was using. And then trying to research to find, hey, will this work with the Mac was kind of tough because most everything works with a PC, but not everything works with a Mac. And even now, I have a new laptop that's probably 6 or 7 years old. And one of the first headsets that I bought doesn't work through. Like the last time I tried to use it about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was talking to a friend on Discord, and it wouldn't even recognize the microphone. So I was like, crap. So there's so many different choices. I can't really recommend. I definitely like the Blue Snowball omnidirectionals, but they also make one that's just just a regular for podcasting. This one's actually rated for music as well, because there's people that record and do like, guitar and different things. They use the Blue Snowball and they recommended it. And my husband plays a lot of guitar, just classical. He just strums and does his thing. And every single time I say that now, I'm thinking about Mike going, ah! Sorry. But that I bought it so that we could use it with other things as well as podcasting. And I've had it pretty much for a while. I mean, I can't even, I've taken this to conventions. I wrap it really nice so that it's nice and padded so it doesn't ever fall and break. It doesn't get banged around because it's not good for the solenoid for you to do that. No. Things will just disintegrate if you do not treat them correctly. And had to keep them away from my kids, and that's been a challenge on its own. But yeah, I haven't ever had anything that's, if it broke, the Blue Snowball, I would absolutely replace it with another Blue Snowball. In terms of headsets, there's so many out there. I probably would go with a new one that my husband uses for work. That's something that, like, he works for a company that has a lot of technology stuff, and what they would recommend, and I would probably go with one of those.
Nice. Yeah, I've replaced my headphones at least twice since I started podcasting.
Oh, wow.
And now I have I went with Logitech's for a while, and now I have a Mackie headset.
Yeah, I think Logitech was the one that I had. So
I had a whole bunch of different setups in the beginning, and then back in, I think, 2014, one of our other podcasting friends, Dustin Vancouver, showed me these JVC cans, and I'm like, okay, I'm sold. And I've only had to replace them once so far. I'm on my second pair of JVC cans at this point.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, did you think that you'd be podcasting for as long as you have?
Nope. When I started that, I did not expect that. I did not expect to podcast for 5 years. And when I say podcast for 5 years, because some only come out monthly, ours was weekly. It was every Tuesday we recorded, every Wednesday it was published. And that was like that way for that was that way for 5 years. And there was actually a time where we split the podcast. So I would take two people and we would review a comic, and Matt would take two different people and they would review a comic, and I got to do all the editing on both of them.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So we would be putting out podcasts like crazy. I mean, it would definitely be like, we would still go out once a week, but instead of having like one of them would get published one week and the next week would be something else, but we would still be recording. So I would have footage to kind of go over and do things with. We also did interviews. We interviewed a lot of artists and writers, and I think we even got Andy Schmidt one time too. So yeah, we just did a lot of different things. So as we did the podcasting, we just got an idea and we pitched it to each other and figured out what we wanted to do and just went and did it. So it was, we could do anything we wanted. Like I said, Dave said, here, go have fun. Mm-hmm. And so we did.
Nice. So how have your podcasting goals changed since you started compared to now?
I still want to do it. Like I would absolutely sit down and start another podcast if I had the time to do it. I would absolutely do that again. My goals definitely would revolve around editing, because I prefer to do it myself. I don't want to pay somebody else to do it.
Yep.
And so it would probably be, I would try to keep it more concise and less as long as it takes.
Thank God we're in the same time zone now. I don't have to stay up till 3 a.m. anymore.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting older. You guys are getting old. I'm sure you guys figured this out too. And I have a family. I have kids. And so it's like, it was great when they were younger, but now it's like I've got so many moving pieces. I can't even keep my brain straight enough to be able to do my own podcast. But I have ideas. I have lots of ideas that I've started writing down and going, oh, what if I did this? And if I was to start another podcast again, I would definitely have a vision. Like, what do we want to overall arcing stuff? I'd have to be able to come up with enough content to fill, a month, couple months, several months of just content, even if it's brief and concise and to the point. At least, we'd have that. And I'd also have to come up with like a new jingle and maybe like a new, like one of those things that, you listen to some podcasts where they just have this little thing that they do that's just unique to them. And every podcast has their own, and they're all unique to the subject that they're talking about. Like I've listened to a couple of writing podcasts, and they make it short because blah, 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 blah. Or another one where I listened to a hacker podcast. And what makes his unique is just how he starts it and how he ends it is like really, he does these little jingle things. So you kind of have to do that because it's part of, you are doing something that's supposed to be entertaining people. And so my vision of podcasting is to, fit that bill and to be interesting, entertaining, and something that people would like to listen to for however long it is. Hopefully not 3 to 4 hours. I don't know. We'll see. It depends on the topic. Like, if it's Transformers, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, "Oh, it was just too long."
No.
Usually, it's not long enough. Oh, are you going to do this one and this one and this one? And I was like, no. So it also depends on your audience. I mean, that's definitely something that you have to think about is your audience, how much they can take.
Yeah. I think for me, it's more of a thing of how much can I sit here and record now?
And let's be honest. If they're not entertaining, that's true. Kind of thing. I've listened to quite a few like really rough. Hey, I'm a Transformers fan and I want to start a podcast, and then they record for 4 hours, and you're like, okay, what did I just listen to? Because there's a lot of swearing, a lot of angst and hate, and they didn't even like Transformers. Why do they want to bring podcasting into this? And then there was maybe 10 minutes where it was ultra hilarious, where they just got in this little groove. They didn't talk over each other, and they like said something coherent that made me laugh. That was like honestly funny, but that was only 10 minutes.
Out of 4 hours.
Out of 4 hours, yeah. So.
All right. So that
thankfully we've grown out of that.
Yes. I mean, I still curse, but that's just me.
I meant like the 4-hour podcast talking about nothing.
It's like I said off air. I mean, I go and I edit things and it'll be like 9 minutes of off air stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's why I use edit points. Right. All right. As far as your podcast listenership, you kind of already started talking about these questions. As a listener, what defines a good podcast for you?
As a listener, okay. Knowledgeable content. Like there has to be like one of the ones that I listen to, it's called The Dark Knight Diaries. I know I'm totally plugging them. But
okay, we'll check them out.
Yeah, so it's a hacker podcast, and it's quite fascinating because everything he does his own investigation. He interviews people, but it's like he breaks out of the interview to kind of summarize certain parts. But how he does it is just so interesting, and what he has to say, he has a lot of passion because this is his livelihood. This is what he does. He works in the industry, in different parts of the industry. He's hacked himself, but he's in the technology biz.
Right.
But he's doing this on the side for just, himself. And I like it because it's just, he has a different take that I don't think I've heard from any other podcast. And so that's why I keep coming back, is because it's genuinely interesting, and listening to him talk about things that get him psyched is, I like that passion. That passion I will keep coming back. I've literally in the last, when I first started listening, I was instantly hooked. I thought, oh, I really like how this guy has his setup. Sometimes I don't think we've ever had a podcast with him that's over an hour and a half long. So it's pretty to the point, but it's also he's very good at researching all of the information that he puts out there, because he'll talk about a specific situation or a specific person or this thing that is new that maybe you haven't heard of. And it's really interesting. And so that's what I really like about that. When it comes to fan run things, I think it's really important that you get a group of people, maybe not all of them at the same time, but I think that 3 is a really good number for podcasting, because it's just, it's one of those things where if there's 2 people that run the show and they have a guest, then you guys you've worked out how to talk and not talk over each other.
Right.
You pause enough to be able to have an interaction. When you get more than 4 people, it sometimes can get a little awkward. And so some of that can be fixed in editing, but not all of it. Sometimes when people are talking over each other, or it gets really heated and you're like, I don't know how to go. I don't know how to fix this. You can't. Sometimes you just can't. But, I think that really helps when people have something interesting to say, so that not everybody agrees with the same thing, so that they're like, hey, I'm going to take this point of view and I'm going to take this point of view. And they both kind of fit together, but they're just different. And I think that the interest in the words and the way that you describe things is really important.
As a listener, what does a podcast have to draw you in?
These are hard questions. They're not easy answer questions either.
Nope. And you're only our second podcast approach guest. As a listener, what does a podcast have to draw you in?
I think this one kind of works a little bit with the previous question, because it has to have a topic. If you're going to talk about writing, then the podcast has to be about writing. If you're going to talk about blah, 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 you're going to have to stay on that topic. I think it's okay every once in a while to kind of go off topic, but I've also edited a lot of things where they've gone off topic, and it might be funny, it might be relevant, but if you're, again, get back to the time length here, and you're like, do I really want to listen to 4 hours of this?
And that's funny, because I did not send you these questions, and you're pretty much answering them as we go. Because question 11 is, as a listener, do you prefer short 30 minutes to an hour and 30 minute shows, or do you prefer longer podcast episodes, as in 2 hours or more?
It depends on the podcast.
Yep.
It really does. It depends on the podcast, and it depends on the
absolutely,
topic.
Yeah. As a listener, do you start at the beginning of a podcast, the most recent episode, or do you jump around? So, obviously, if it's like a cartoon review podcast, you probably should start at the beginning. But if it's something where they're reviewing Fahrenheit 451 in one episode, but they're reviewing A Light in the Attic in another episode, you don't necessarily have to have listened to the Fahrenheit 451 episode before listening to A Light in the Attic.
Yeah. So with this one, it depends on whether or not I've been introduced to the podcast, early. And it also depends on how far back it is. When I first started listening to Moonbase 2, they had been on the air for like 4 years. And
That's
there was no way that I was going to go back and listen to all of it. I listened to the stuff that had just recently come out, which was actually in a good way the right thing to do, because they talked about the news and they talked about stuff that's coming out right now, stuff that they liked, stuff that they hated, stuff and how it works. And, oh, I got this new thing. I unwrapped it. And, you know, this new transformer transforms this way. And they were reviewing that like live. So a lot of the content was specific to the time to make sure that you were actually, you know, in the day, like right now. If I'd gone back to stuff that they had before, it would have been interesting to see what had happened before, but it kind of dated it to a point where it might not be relevant. Whereas the podcast that I listened to about hacking, it was, when I first started, it had only had a year's worth of content, and we're talking about 2 episodes a month that he's come out with. So it wasn't too hard to go through and like listen to the whole thing. And I quite literally did within a month. I kind of binged on it like a big deal. So
yeah, funny because funny because one of the ones that I listened to, I just found it, I think last year or the year before, and it started in 2018. And I'm like, I got to start at the beginning, because it was more of a thing of, at the time they were going through what was going on in their lives. Mm-hmm. And at the time, both of the guys' wives were pregnant. It's like, okay, you kind of have to keep up with that. Yeah. Kind of a thing. But yeah.
I guess it just depends, because you have to evaluate. Like I said, I was able to sit down and listen to the hacking podcast without any problems.
Right.
Literally just, and it was entertaining enough that it just felt like, oh, I want more. Ooh, I'd like to really hear more. I'd like to hear what he says about this. Ooh, this topic looks interesting. I don't know anything about it, but he always just has this it factor that sounds, he has something interesting to say, and how he describes things and talks about the topic is quite interesting, so I can't not listen. But that being said, I also, like I said, and with a couple other podcasts, Radio Free Cybertron, they had so much content, and some of it was on the interline. Sometimes some of it was on YouTube, and some of it wasn't. And so I didn't really go back and listen to all of the stuff that they have, but
no one wants to go back to 1999.
No, yeah. But again, it depends on what you're looking at and what the podcast is. For me, when I find something new, I just look and see, 1, how long is it? 2, do they include anything that has like up to current dated stuff that's going on like right now, which means maybe I might want to be listening to the stuff now and then going back and listening to stuff later, depending on how many episodes there are and how long they are. Because if they're only 20 minutes, okay, sure, I'll go back and listen to a whole 2-3 years worth of podcasts. I can do that. But if you need to be up to date on stuff, then I'm going to be listening while that. And I don't know if I don't have enough time to be able to do both, then I probably won't. I also started out, when I started listening to podcasts, taking notes. Detailed notes. So I do have the first 6 to 8 months of all of the podcasts that I listened to with Moonbase 2. I have notes, very extensive ones. And sometimes they would reference stuff, and I would go back and find that podcast and re-listen to it sometimes when they would reference things. So I was a little crazy. The only other person that I know of that has done something like that was Charles from Transmissions. Yes. He used to be like one of our listen to the underbase. We'd get notes from him. And I would just go, oh, he's doing what I'm doing or what I did back in the day. That was really surreal, is to be like, oh, I used to do that. And now I have a fan of our podcast doing that over our podcast. And I just went, wow, that is just so surreal.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So you kind of answered the, how many hosts, aspect.
Oh, yeah.
So when do you decide to kind of just stop listening to a podcast altogether?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever gotten to the end. I think most of the time when I've stopped listening, it's because my life has gotten kind of busy and I just got out of the habit. It's nothing against them. It's everything against me. Or the podcast just ends. They just stop recording. Like TF Wire, they literally just stopped recording and left this void, and I had to fill it.
Yeah, that kind of happened with me, and that's why I started All Things Transformers in the first place.
Yeah. Or I take that the T-Formers used to have a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Ender and Anthony.
Yep.
And I started listening to their last 2 or 3 episodes before they ended. And I was so sad because they ended the podcast and I had just started again. So it was like, I found TF Wire. I found this. I found Moonbase 2. I found the T-Formers one, and 2 of them in the matter of just listening to a couple episodes ended. So I was like, but I will always remember what Anthony said in the last episode that they had. And he said this, and it really stuck with me because it's probably the reason why I decided to go, okay, sure, I'll do a podcast. Is that they said when we end something like this, he was talking about how, yeah, we're ending the podcast, but this gives an opportunity for somebody else to kind of fill that. Some other fan out there is going to listen and hear my voice and say, hey, I can do something for my community and I'm going to do this. And they will fill the void. And he was absolutely right. And because I actually reached out to him after that, so you're kind of probably the reason why I got into podcasting is because you said that on your podcast, your last podcast.
There you go.
So speaking of podcasters getting into podcasting, what podcasts are you currently listening to?
Yeah, so I'm currently listening to the Darknet Diaries, and they actually, let me see, I think there's another one on there. I've been so swamped with my audiobooks that I haven't really been, that's pretty much the only one I'm listening to right now. But every once in a while, I'll bring up an oldie that I haven't heard in a while. Somebody will say something online or something and reference something. I'll be like, oh, that's right. And then I'll go back and listen to a couple other things. I did start looking at bots and panels, but it only went a couple episodes, so it didn't really get off the ground very well. And then I've got lists of podcasts that I want to check out. I just haven't had the time. So the only one really that I'm making time for right now is Darknet Diaries.
Nice.
And anything that, Mike sends my way.
Right, sure. Nobody listens to my stuff.
I would listen to your stuff.
Yeah, it sucks. All right. As
that way
a
I can turn around and tease you.
I know, right? As a podcast producer, do you find yourself listening to podcasts less and less? So when you were doing the Underbase, did you, because that's where I find myself now, where because I'm producing more and more, I'm listening to less and less. I mean, yes we just came out of a whole year where I didn't have my computer. So I spent a whole year listening to shows and discovering new shows and getting into old shows and that kind of thing. But now that I'm producing them again, I keep up with maybe 7 podcasts at this point.
Yeah.
Luckily, they only release weekly, if not monthly or bi-weekly, but
yeah, full hands, like full stop. Once I started podcasting, I stopped listening to podcasts. I would listen. I tried to listen to a little while. I did keep up on the ones like Radio Free Cybertron. Usually were ones that I was with. I stopped listening to Moonbase 2. That's an evil confession right there. Because they were our sister podcast. They were the one that started it all, and I stopped listening to them once they started podcasting. I did listen to TFW 2005 one for a while, but also ended up stopping to listening to them because sometimes it was just too long. I can't think of any of the other ones. There were other ones I know of, but I've been just notoriously bad at listening to podcasts. Like since my life has gotten busy, and since I've been, I had a baby. That's why I stopped doing podcasts, to be honest. Yeah. So I've been busy. It's.
And it's like I say this all the time. I've said this for 12, 13, 14 years now. Life comes before podcasting.
It does.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Until life is just so overwhelming that you need an escape, and then you go to podcasting. You go to listen to one. And that's why I got back into listening to podcasts, is because I just wanted a little bit of something different that I didn't think a book could cover for me. And the good thing is that, like I said, the Darknet Diaries, they've actually recommended a couple of books, and I've gone out and gotten them because they sounded interesting, and they were absolutely interesting. So yeah, cool, I stopped. Cool. The more I produced as a producer, the less I listened to be honest. Yes. Yeah.
As a boat. Yeah. I think everybody does that. And once you start producing your own content, it's not that you don't want to keep up with the content that you enjoy or the people that you started listening to. It's that you have to put all your time into doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
The other thing is, when you're producing, after you do things for a certain way for a little while, you want to come up with new content because you're interested and you're like, hey, I did this, this, and this. Well, what if we did this? Like I said, after a year of podcasting and reviewing Transformer comics, we started getting people on for interviews. And we did that for a while. We did comics, then interviews. And then I was going to a couple conventions and decided to do in-person interviews. And it just so we just you're in your creative mode producing your podcast. You're going to want to do more. You're going to want to get better at things. You're going to, hey, I was always interested in this thing. What if we did more? What if we did this? And so it's like, that's usually what you do because you're as a producer, you're creative and you're creating content.
Absolutely. So speaking of the creating content part, are you a podcast planner or are you just throwing stuff at the mic to see what sticks? Please don't throw anything at me.
I'm totally a planner. I'm totally a planner. Me too. Even more so, Mike. Every single time we did a comic review, I probably wrote a full sheet of notes on every single panel. So I would be fully knowledgeable of what I was doing and that I wouldn't miss pieces that I needed to point out or other people pointed out. So I was like, okay, I don't need to cover that. It was just like, I would write down almost everything I say, which is only adds to the pain of preparing and then editing afterwards. And then,
I blame you for this. I blame you for this.
You blame me?
When I was listening to the Underbase, you had said, we are using Comixology Guided View. We are going panel by panel, page by page. That's why there are some episodes of the Bullbag that are like 2.5, 3 hours long because I'm having myself and whatever co-host go through the entire comic as we're talking about it. We don't always do that now, but it started because that's what you said you were doing.
And you had to, follow what we were doing?
Well, of course. Of course. Why lead by an example when you can follow a better one?
And most of that actually came and evolved from the fact that we wanted to do a deep dive into a lot of the work that was being put out. And to be honest, when we did that, there was a lot of artists that would listen to what we said, because they'd come back afterwards and say, "I've been listening to your podcast." I like the fact that you actually go panel to panel, because so often they just critique the story and they never talk about the art, they never talk about the color, and they never talk about the letterer. And it's like, just, they talk about the full content, but they never get any feedback as an artist on their specific like panels and things that they did. Hey, did this panel read right to you? Did this, and so for us to actually do a deep dive like that, the artists loved it. The colorists loved it, because they're like, ooh, they figured out what I was doing. Ooh, they did this. Or we'd get excited and then we'd come back with the artist saying, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was going for. Even, and then sometimes they're like, yeah, just go with that. We just liked what you said. Well, it's like, because being a colorist, being a letterer, being an artist, and even being a writer is such a solitary thing. You don't get to interact at that level with a lot of people and a lot of reviews. You just get, like, on a lot of the comic review sites, they just get a little blurb. That's it. And so to actually have a podcast that goes into each and every panel and talks about, hey, did this work? Or it kind of read a little weird to me. Or, ooh, I think it means this. Or that, the foreshortening is a little weird, or something like that. To be able to have, and it was mostly constructive, to have that is like, for an artist, is like, it's the thing you want, but you can never have. Because not often do you have somebody do a deep dive or a review like that. So that's what made the Underbase unique, is because we did actually try to go and do that. And
I still try to go and do that. It just depends on what it is.
Yeah.
I don't always do it. It depends on the host. It depends on the co-host. It depends on the time that we have. If it's somebody like, me, you, Nicole, and Heather, we're already going to talk for 4 hours. We might as well record the thing.
Very true. We can't be held responsible for what happens after midnight.
No, we can't.
As a producer, are you kind of a one-person show kind of host, or do you prefer working with co-hosts?
I've always worked with co-hosts. So I prefer that, but I have had at times where I've had to record content, like a news bit, or re-record something, or I have recorded intros and outros to shows, and just little bits. But I do prefer to have somebody to talk with, because when you're talking yourself and you're like, it's just you, which I just don't have an idea how I would do that. I would really keep it concise. Of course, I take that back. It depends on the topic, because on the reviews, you definitely have to have more than one person. But when I was doing stuff for Radio Free Cybertron, I would do like short reviews, like 5 or 10 minutes. It would just be like a comic corner with LadyWreck, and anybody out there that will like, oh, that's right, you used to do that, right? They're on YouTube. You can find them. They're usually in right smack dab in the middle of something. But yeah, I have all of those still. But they were usually, I kept them really, really short, because I knew that it was going to be just part of a greater whole. And so it's quite literally me for like 8 to 10 minutes doing a quick review of a comic until... And I did that for, I'd say, a good year and a half, I think. I don't know. It was kind of like one of those things where I did it, and then I suddenly stopped doing it. And they had other people start doing their own reviews. And so I kind of helped change their mind about what they were going to like read in terms of comics. And once they started getting that bug, then I was like, okay, my job here is done. And then they just ran with it. So, and I think they're still doing it now. I don't check in often, but the videos that I did were just me just talking for like I said, anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes, just a brief, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. Then it was quite literally a version of the Underbase, except slammed into 10 minutes. So it would be like, hey, I just put out like news content in the comic world, and then a quick review of the comic, and go get it at your local comic shop, and that would be the end. And so and it was just me. It was like I would record them sometimes at home. Sometimes I recorded them in my car in video form because I was there for therapy for my kids. So I had literally about 15, 20 minutes to myself where I didn't have anybody asking me for anything. And I didn't have to go into a room and lock the door. I just like, hey, I'm in a car and I'm going to do a comic review. and it was in my car. And I usually would say, hey, it's LadyWreck here in my car. It was so weird. I'm sorry, but that was what I did because that's all I had time for. But I think it was like, oh yeah, it kind of added to the motif of she's a busy mom. And she's still doing comic reviews for all of us out here. And so I kind of just leaned into that. But if I was to start another podcast, I would absolutely have a host. I would have somebody that I co-host with. I would have somebody that would be on to talk, whatever it is the topic is, because I would rather listen. I would rather have a discussion type podcast than just somebody talking at me. That being said, the Darknet Diaries, most of that quite literally is just Jack Reciter. He talks through at least 50% of it where it's just him and nobody else.
Yeah, some people can do the one-person show, other people can't.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the person. If they have something really passionate to say, and they can really say something that resonates with the person that's listening, absolutely. I prefer to have a guest. I prefer to have that, but like after having to record myself by myself, it's hard. It seems like it should be really easy, but it is harder than you expect it to be.
Totally. As a producer, you've kind of answered that you're a planner, but some of the aspects of, do you feel that you need all the fancy equipment to go along with it?
Board and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, no. We are totally amateur here.
Yeah, I personally don't see the need for it. I know there's a lot of like uppity podcasters that are like, well, you have to have the board.
No, you don't.
But I'm like pure USB. So is that kind of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I did think about getting like a small board thing, because when I got my new laptop, I didn't realize that it wouldn't actually work with a soundboard. I went to a couple conventions where I tried to actually plug my laptop into a soundboard to record from the microphone feed. And I found out through the process of elimination that my computer just doesn't handle that. But there is a little board that I could that would be the go-between between a big soundboard and my computer. And I thought about buying it. It was like $100. And I thought, if it's just to go to a convention and record things, I don't know if I want to do that. So it ended up being that things changed, and even the convention that I was going to kind of changed things a little bit. So I just decided not to do it. But I have thought about it. I was researching a little board that would be that go-between thing if I wanted to continue to do that, and I didn't. So it was all good. But that was more like just because there was something that I wanted to do, but I couldn't do. So I figured out why it wasn't working. It took me a little while, but I figured it out.
So as a producer, you kind of already answered this one, but I just want to know what the actual number is.
Okay.
How much time do you actually put into the editing of one podcast episode?
jeez. I never thought, hey, 5 years from now, you're going to be about your podcasting days. Remember all of those hours that you spent making sure it sounded right? Mm-hmm. So if I record an hour show, it's probably going to take me anywhere from double that to maybe an extra 30 minutes, because I like to listen when I edit to make it sound as natural as possible. So I will take out every little and nose sniff. And if there's a big gap, I'll usually take that out and make it sound like it was seamless. Like we paused for just a moment, just long enough to feel like, okay, now it feels too long. That's not natural. And so or sometimes if there's two people talking too close together and I'm able to split those tracks, I will have one person talk and then make it sound natural so that it basically sounds seamless. So you'll hear, instead of two people overlapping, you'll hear a seamless conversation that sounds like, oh, okay, that was like completely perfectly planned. It wasn't. It's just made that way because you were able to go through and make it sound natural.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. I've been editing the shows since late 2009, early 2010, and for me, I need everything on one track. However, there have been times, actually with this episode, I will actually be editing this as each of our tracks, because that's how Zencastr records. They record each of us on its own track. So
that's cool.
That takes me 4 times as long as what it would take me on a normal track.
See, now I prefer that. It probably would take me the same amount of time, but I prefer it that way just because there are just so many moments where there's overlap that I've had over the years that I almost just prefer everybody to be on their own separate track. And then the other thing on top of that is that not everybody has, I've only podcasted with amateur podcasters. So everybody's mileage on sound is different.
True. Yeah.
There was a couple of times where Nicole had a really bad noise in the background on hers, or she was really, really quiet. And so I'd have to go through and boost in places her noise so that you could actually hear it, so that it would sound like the same level as the other two people that were podcasting. So it's like, I prefer it just because it gives me the ultimate control of being able to make somebody that's maybe too loud, turn them down, or to go through in certain areas where maybe somebody laughed and they got a little too close to the mic and there was the reverb that you get in your ear. I don't like that because it hurts.
Oh yeah.
And so I will specifically take that little section and tone it down so that it doesn't sound so loud. Even if it kind of sounds a little weird, your ears will thank you.
Yep. Absolutely. As a producer, do you prefer, and this is funny because I actually made you do one of these, do you prefer in-person recordings or over the internet recordings via Skype? Now, this is funny because it has been 5 years since the last podcast.
It has.
Holy crap.
It has.
Holy crap. 5 years this April. Wow. So BotCon 2016 was in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yep.
You were coming up and I was like, hey, let's hang out. We went to the free Stan Bush concert and all that and everything else. And I was like, let's do a BotCon recap the next day or something. And you're like, I'm so tired. Can we just do it? I'm like, no, you're here. You have to come to my apartment because it's not going to be as cool as it would be as if you weren't here, kind of thing. So it was Amy and I in my apartment at the time. And then Nicole was on Skype. And that's how we recorded that BotCon 2016 over on All Things Transformers. So which do you prefer? Do you prefer the in-person recordings or do you prefer what we're doing currently?
It depends on, of course, how close you are. I think both are completely valid. I like both. They both kind of pull out different things. When you're across the computer, it's can be very solitary, but it's also interesting to also podcast in person because things stand out differently when you podcast in person. And so for me, I always kind of liked the idea of having those type of communications, those basically conversations. Both are completely valid, both completely work for me. The downside is that sometimes it's harder to get technology to work the same way. And when you're in, because I've also done interviews where I was in a hotel room and everybody was sitting around and it works, you can hear it. But then when you go back and you listen to the footage and you go, oh crap, you can barely hear us. Then your heart just drops because you're like, oh, the editing on this is going to kill me. I'll be doing this forever. So, there's good and bad to both. And I think it's good to have experience with both because you find out where your strengths and your weaknesses are as you jump in with both feet and see if it'll work. And
absolutely.
It's just one of those things where I think I like the experience of doing both.
As both a listener and a producer, do you prefer one feed have everything, or should each type of show have its own feed? So let's say I want to do a cartoon podcast, but I want to focus on every episode of Transformers Animated. Should that have its own feed, or should that be in with everything else that's on all things Transformers?
I think that depends on how your setup is. Because I know that you do a vast amount of content over shows.
I am a podcast machine.
You are a podcasting machine. That cannot be challenged. You totally are. I think it just depends because, obviously you don't want, if you've got people that are interested in just comics, then you have to, keep that feed apart from the ones that are like, hey, I like just Transformers. And so
right.
I don't know. It's just one of those things that I guess it just depends on your vision as a producer. That being said, if we always, with the Underbase, we just threw all of the episodes in together because just as many people were cool with reviews as they were with the artist interviews. So it was like, hey, instead of doing a review this week, we are going to have an interview. And so that would come on and I never got any complaints. Nobody ever said, oh, this should be put in a different place. That being said, the place where we produced and published the podcast, I would just tag the different things. So if you went to the website and said, I only want to see all the interviews, you click on interviews.
Yeah.
And all of the interviews are going to come up. If you click on, I want to see the reviews, you can have all the reviews come up. I want to see Robots in Disguise reviews and not More Than Meets the Eye reviews. And you can do that too. So I guess it just depends on what you want to do for your show. I mean, you put out so much more content than I've ever done. So I'd say I can absolutely see the reason why you'd want to go, hey, I want to put all of this here and this here and this here and keep them separate.
Well, once all your kids are in college, we'll be talking like this is old people podcasting in a podcast.
Maybe.
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Hey there.
Get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn. Honestly, you'd be surprised because I listen. There's a lady on NPR. I don't remember her name. She's a interviewer, and she's been working on NPR for years. And I don't remember what her name is. I think it's something Gross, Debbie Gross. But she actually is a really old woman. I mean, mature woman, maybe it would be a better thing to say. But her voice does not sound that old. So you'd be surprised. We could be doing this all the way up into our 60s.
I plan to do it till I die.
I think that will definitely sound a little bit different as you age because, as voice actors will be the first to tell you, your voice does change. It doesn't stay the same. Some people can stay the same, but not a lot.
And that's interesting because I'm actually... There's a comic that came out from a friend of mine who used to be a radio DJ in Louisville, and I want to do the show by myself because I don't know if I share it with other people, if I share the comic with other people, that they'll be as, I don't want to say as kind. I mean, I'm still going to critique it, but it's one of those things where it is the first show inside the pull bag that I've done solo since 2013. The very first episode 1, I did solo by myself, and I just recently listened to that, and I'm like, who's that guy? I don't sound like that anymore. It's ridiculous. Take it away, Steve.
So, was there ever a moment when you were done with podcasting?
No. There was absolutely a time where I had to step away from it, but I can tell you right now, I have missed it every day since. I miss a lot. Maybe not the editing so much.
Yeah, I don't miss that. I just give it to Mike, and then I say, hey, here you go.
That's what I'm here for.
I have gone
He's my edit monkey.
And edited a few things since then. I'm like, oh gosh, this is the one thing I do not remember. This one thing I do not miss this. Because this is the part where it's hard and it's tedious and you have to sit there and you're like, But I do miss having the conversations and being kind of in the know because I was doing that all the time. And you made it your business to know everything. Like not everything, like you made it your business to know what's going on in the world of Transformers today in comics.
Right.
And so it was like, who's this? Who's that? What are they talking about? Like, hey,
why does it matter?
Yeah, why does it matter? And hey, this new person is in IDW. We need to get him on for an interview. And that was... I am
so late to that party, but that's going to be rectified in a few weeks, which I will tell you about off air.
Okay. But that's the thing. You get to know stuff. And not only that is that sometimes they reach out to you too. So they're like, hey, just to let you know, or to say, oh, are you going to the convention? Blah, blah, blah. And it was really kind of nice to be able to be in the know on some of those things. And then there's also the times where, hey, they put out that news report on that website and we need to have the website take it down.
Uh-oh.
Because that happened a lot when I was over at T-Formers. Just saying.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And usually...
Somehow that doesn't surprise me.
So because they had my contact information, because I've always been really like, hey, sure, here's my contact information. Here's how you can get a hold of me. You can call my cell phone. I did have Andy Schmidt from IDW call me up one day and say, hey, this is Andy Schmidt. And I just went, I about dropped my phone.
I bet you did.
This is... What can I do for you, Mr. Andy Schmidt? And he's like, yeah, so you're associated with T-Formers, right? And I was like, yes. I thought, oh, crap. Who am I going to have to kill? But it wasn't that bad. It actually turned out that somebody else had put a news report out that they were trying to squash. You remember the whole Amazon faux pas where they pretty much took the Transformers... what was it? Revenge? No, it was Dark of the Moon. They put the comic book out on the Amazon website and it pretty much spoiled the whole damn movie.
Yep.
Yeah, there was some people scrambling around at that point to try to get that taken out. And Andy was one of them. I felt bad for him because he had a really huge job on his hands.
Yes, I can imagine he would have.
But, yeah. Being in contact and having that type of interaction that you don't see out, that doesn't get put out there, those are moments that I kind of miss because it was kind of nice to feel important.
So what do you see as the differences in podcasting versus being on the radio?
Oh.
No,
A paycheck.
I know none of us have really.
Yeah, that too.
That too. I mean, I know none of us have really been on the radio unless we actually call in.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got several friends who are DJs, but I mean, as a listener kind of a thing, the differences of doing the whole podcast thing versus radio.
Yeah, I'm still giggling about the paycheck thing.
It's true.
It is true.
All of this is volunteer. Like as a podcaster, I do it for fun, and I do it for free, and I do it for myself, and sometimes I even do it for just the listening enjoyment for everybody else, and the listening enjoyment for the artists that would sit and listen and be entertained. For the sense of community, that's what I would do it for. The difference, I think there's a little bit more pressure, I think, because the expectation of having a little bit more professionalism, I guess.
Right.
But that being said, I've often flipped on the radio and listened to, DJs DJing and talking about the content, like the Bill and Dave in the morning, and the stuff that they have to just pull out of their arses. Mm-hmm. Put on the radio, and not only that, is on top of that, it can't be too edgy, but it also can't be really boring either. So if you're really boring, you're going to get replaced really quick. That being said, I also grew up in a small town where we had a DJ night, where there was this lady that would do the DJ dedication line, and she was shit. I'm just going to come right out. And we all listened to it for years, and we all wondered, how is it that she still has a job? Because she sounds like crap. She's not entertaining. The only thing that's good is that she goes ahead and puts the stuff out there. It got to the point where people would start calling in and being really rude to her and embarrassing her. And she still kept the job. And there were so many rumors flying, and I was just like, small towns, they can really suck. That being said, my BFF at the time, her sister also worked at the radio station. And one time this lady came in late, or not late, she was sick. She couldn't do it because she lost her voice. And her sister covered the show for her. And she rocked it. It was like, oh my gosh, please hire her. She's so amazing. She was younger. The dedication line was a lot for like kids and teens and people calling in. And, this is way 80s. I don't know if they still do this anymore, but, it's just those things that all of the teenagers in this small town would always listen, and they wanted to be able to, have somebody that was more like them. Well, my friend's sister was that. She was very much the age group. She got the content. She did a couple things that were new, that were interesting, and we all loved it. And she didn't get the job. So radio is just so different, I think. There's so much. There's politics that are involved. The good thing about being an amateur is, and having the internet as easily accessible as it is that anybody that's out there can get on a mic, record something, put it out there, and it can be amazing. And you can create your own content, and you can have your own listenership and actually do really well doing it. Easily, overnight, you can be an overnight sensation. The downside of that is that there's a lot out there, and sometimes it's hard to find the really good stuff. And even then, sometimes when you find the really good stuff, sometimes it's, out of all of the listings of stuff, you just kind of get lost in the pack. So there's good and bad, pros and cons. I wouldn't want the radio job, to be honest.
Nope. Ever since I started podcasting, I was like, nope, I'm good right where I'm at.
I'm good.
So have you done any interviews? And if you have, what were your favorite ones?
She's done a ton of them.
I'd say probably all the ones I've done have actually been right here on this show.
No. You've done plenty of convention interviews. There was a whole thing with you, Josh, and Josh. And
Oh, okay. You're talking about other people that I've interviewed. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I was like, are you talking about me?
Famous people.
No.
Yeah. Well,
not
famous,
us. Not us.
point.
Famous people. The famous people.
I've done a lot of really interesting ones. I've pretty much interviewed all of the artists that were working on Transformers comics, not the current ones right now, because right now they're not. There's different ones. I think because I've done like Casey Collar, Josh Perez, Josh Burcham, like all of them.
Yep.
James Roberts, Alex Milne. I mean, let's just go through the list. There'd be like tons of them, and I'd probably have to go look up. Oh, Andrew Griffith, Andy Schmidt, John Barber. Let's see who else. All of the Roberts and Barber era. I got all of those guys on, and even some of them were even before that, because when we first started out, you send out emails and you hope that people contact you, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you wait for a little while, then come back again with another, hey, we'd like to have you on for an interview, and eventually you sync up. We had Flint Dilley and Chris Metzen on too.
That's right.
Yeah. So like there's lots of one that we've done that were really, really great. But I think the one that probably stands out, and I don't remember what happened on this one. I think the reason why I say I like this one is because everything just worked perfectly. And I asked all the right questions, and I didn't when I edited, it was super, super clean because I had not muffled up anything. I think it was the Casey Collar interview. And it was just fantastic to talk with him. But I think that's the reason why I liked that one, is because I didn't screw it up. It had absolutely everything to do with the fact that I asked all the questions. I was right on cue. Everything he said, and I followed it back up with something else. Like it just flowed really well. And then even afterwards, my co-host, because he was on that one too, he turned to me and said, "Yep." It's like, that was your favorite one, wasn't it? It's like, yes, because I didn't screw it up. And he was like, I knew it, because you sounded like you were right in your groove. And I was like, yes. So that was because I was confident. I wasn't like super nervous. I felt like I knew what I was asking, and I had all the content. I was like, everything just kind of boom in my head. And it was just like, yes, I was in my zone.
Absolutely.
But I also have done ones where I was like, face palm every single time I think about it.
No,
it was
a few of
terrible. And I can tell you the one it was. It was an in-person review of Shadow Play at Auto Assembly.
Oh, no.
We spent like 2.5 hours, and I got halfway through that, and I thought, oh my God, what did I do? What have I done? And I was like, this is so evil. And the reason why it was is because it was the last night of the convention. Everybody is super dead.
Yep.
Alex Milne, James Roberts, they look like they were just completely exhausted. And here I'm asking these questions, and I thought, I am the worst jerk in the world. And I figured that out like 45 to an hour into it, when we were all just kind of like, and I thought, I will never do this ever again. And I didn't. I never did that ever again. We did a deep dive into Shadow Play, and I thought, you know what? The fans might like this, but this is torture. I'm never going to do this to another creative or producer or writer ever again. Never.
This is torture. Chain me to the wall. All right, so that ties into one of the two final questions. What advice do you have for new and or veteran podcasters in the art of podcasting?
Have a vision. If you don't have a vision, you're just having a conversation. And it might not actually be entertaining. Have to have a goal. I mean, I have listened to, stuff that's just kind of rambling, and it's like, it's okay to cut the ramble. If it took you, hey, we rambled for a few minutes, and you go back and you listen to it, you're like, you know what, this doesn't really work. Then take the rambling out. It's okay. You can cut it. As a producer, there were times where I was getting podcasts from other people for the Underbase that I wasn't on the podcast with them, and they were doing a review and they got off topic for 10 minutes. And I liked it. It was hilarious. And I took some stuff out of that for the outtakes, but I literally went through there and cut it. And the thing is, you knew it was happening because when they would come back the next time and they say, hey, we better be careful or else Amy will cut this. It was like I knew I was doing a good job because they noticed when half the conversation wasn't there. When they took out all the stuff that was like, you guys are going to get on a watch list over this. And things are different in the UK than they are in the United States. If you say something really raunchy on something like that, you can get put on a watch list. And so I was like, I made it. I took out the stuff that was offensive. I did. I just took out the stuff that was offensive, that was way off topic. Because, guys get together, they have a little bit of, beer or whatever and shooting the shit. And they would go wildly off topic a lot. So as a producer, I'm like, if that's not the vision, it's okay to cut it. Sometimes you have to do it. And I have lots of blackmail.
Don't we all?
So does Mike.
Oh, yeah. I saved blackmail for years.
So do I. I still have stuff from Headshot.
Oh, yes, we do. Yep. All right. Where can the people find your shows?
Well, you can go just Google the Underbase podcast. It's on Libsyn.com or Libsyn something. I'd have to Google it now. It's theunderbase.libsyn.com. They're all there. All of the stuff is, I guess, still relevant because you can still go out and get all the comics.
All the comics,
Maybe the first little bit of it, like the first 10 minutes when they talk about the news and what's being released.
Maybe that's not relevant.
That's not relevant. And usually it's maybe anywhere from the first 10, 15 minutes. And then the rest of it's definitely relevant. But all of the listening material for all of the interviews, because we ask questions that talk about like, hey, where did you get your start? What got you into Transformers? What do you work in? That type of thing. Those things will never, I think, ever really expire because as interviews, you can get to know an artist or a colorist and how they started out. They're like, hey, I'm going to go do that too. So, it's good, at least in that content, so that you have access to that. All of that stuff is still there.
Absolutely. And obviously you have years and years of content with us at GCRN. Yep. So between Gem and the Pull Bag and
My Little Pony
and yeah, My Little Pony.
Ooh, Windblade.
Yay, Windblade. All right. We are going to close it out. I'm going to run through the outro. Everybody will give it a chance to give out their socials and all that good stuff. Thank you for joining us here inside the studio. If you'd like to get in contact with us or leave feedback for the show, there are several ways to do so. Send us email, feedback@geekcastradio.com. Visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on this and all of our other episode posts from this show and all the other shows we do on the network. Here are all the ways you can listen to us nowadays: Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, and of course, the home where our files exist, Spreaker. You can also find us on any other podcatching client you choose to use, but I prefer you use one of these. Leave the show's feedback in iTunes. Please do this. We currently do not have any iTunes reviews. I just checked, so please go over to iTunes and leave Studio 2009 a review. We've got 15 total episodes. Episode 16 is coming soon. Follow us on Twitter at Geekcast Radio is the network Twitter at its ITS. Studio 2009 is the show Twitter. Wow, I cannot talk tonight. I am at TF2 and Mike. Amy, what is your Twitter?
Follow me, Lady of Wreck.
Steve, what's yours?
At SCP-21.
Become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Geekcast Radio Network. You can also check out Studio 2009 podcast over there. And I think Amy still has her the Lady of Wreck or the LadyWreck page over there as well.
Where? Which one?
The LadyWreck page on Facebook.
Yeah, I think so. But I don't use it that often, so it's better to just get me on Twitter.
Probably.
Yeah.
For now, I am TFG and Mike with
Lady Wreck.
Steve Megatron Phillips.
You'll hear us back in the studio soon.
Oh my gosh, this is so great.
For now, I am TFG and Mike with
Lady Wreck.
Steve Megatron.
Sorry, I just botched that one.
Ladies first.
Okay, sorry. Crap, now I don't know what to say.
Okay, fine, I'll redo it.
Sorry.